Hi, my name's Irene, and I have one other video on this channel. It's an ASMR video, and I really want to talk about Succession. I'm going to break down all of the Greek and Roman references in Succession. For a little context, I watched this show, started watching it in January of this year. It now won even more Emmys as it did just last week. And I have watched the show 6 times, and 5 times all the way through. I'm currently on my 6th, and I'm a person who has loved Greek and Roman history and mythology for most of my life. Like most people, I read Percy Jackson as a kid, and that kind of steamrolled it all. And I'm not a historian. Like, I just did this for fun. I just want to share it. I shared something similar on Tumblr, and I honestly just don't use that platform that much, and I just kind of wanted to talk about this a little bit more. And as a little bit of background right before I dive in on why I think this is important, I think there's so many intentional allusions to Greeks and Romans throughout the series. That's often used as foreshadowing. And the most obvious one that comes to mind is, and spoilers for Succession for this whole thing, is most obviously Nero and Sporus, which was in season 3. But there's ones that are a lot more subtle. And I don't think it necessarily leads predominantly towards one or the other. I think you can tell that the creators of this show, Jesse Armstrong, everybody else who's involved, put a lot of thought, and I think that that's really great. So I'm going to break it down by seasons. I'm going to start with the non-specific references first, and then I'll break it down. I'll, cite episodes. You're welcome to go back and fact check me. But yeah, I'm going to start with the non-specific references and say that the whole reason why I think Rome is such an apt metaphor is because of where it is in history. So Rome reigned for 1,000 years, and you people can argue that, founded around 625 BC and fell in AD 476. So if you told the average Roman that it's gonna fall, it would literally seem unthinkable to the average citizen. And that's kind of how the kids view Waystar, and by extension Logan, their father, and I think especially Roman. You can kind of see this in when Logan has the stroke, is the one who's the least accepting of his death. The UTI scene, he's the one who says, which is actually my favorite Roman joke, "Can't we just give dad some cranberry juice and ask him about the deal?" He tends to see his father as infallible. And it's also how Logan views himself, in my opinion. It's how he talks about, it's all I've got is myself at the end of the day. I think that's draws parallels to Rome and how it reigned for 1,000 years, and people just thought of it as this empire that would never fall, but obviously it did. And it kind of, a lot of people will compare late stage capitalism to Rome in the fall. And so I think that all 3 of these things are very much so intertwined with each other, and I think that it's very interesting. And then one of them, kind of moving to my next observation, was that obviously Roman's name is Romulus. And so for anybody who doesn't know, Romulus and Remus are the mythical twin founders of Rome who were raised by a she-wolf. The versions vary, but most tellings say that Romulus wanted to build the city on one hill, Remus on another, and then Romulus kills Remus in an act of fratricide, which then founds Rome. So what does this actually mean for Roman as a character? So the 2 things that I personally think it represents is that, one, I find it super interesting that Logan named his kid Romulus, the twin that killed his brother and founded arguably one of the most powerful empires in history. And it's completely in line with Logan's seriously messed up value system. But he very rarely calls Roman Romulus. He only calls him Romulus a few times, the time where he says, "You better be smelling your armpit." And he just calls him Roman or Rome. saying that he's an everyday soldier, not like the illustrious founder. He's just a Roman, not Romulus. And the second thing it really makes me think of is the whole conversation around who's a killer. Roman really isn't the type who would kill his sibling to rule. He refuses to sign that letter. He doesn't take the out in All the Bells. Like, sure, he does do terrible, awful things to his siblings, but he's not a killer. And I find this contrast with his namesake super interesting, particularly with how this makes Kendall de facto Remus, always the sacrifice and never the ruler. And I think that's super interesting. And then kind of zooming out again, but there's 3 kids really in contention. Like, sorry, Connor. Connor's never really been seriously considered, at least that we know of currently. And famously, Rome had 2 triumvirates. The first triumvirate had Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, and they worked together to consolidate power in Rome, despite their personal dislike of each other, because working together was the only way they could get all they wanted. And this actually worked for a while until Crassus died and Caesar became a dictator and got stabbed by all his co-workers. The second triumvirate was actually legally sanctioned and consisted of Mark Antony Augustus, who was Caesar's adopted son, and Marcus Aurelius. So I almost said Marcus Aurelius. It was formed in response to the assassination of Caesar, and this alliance also fell because Augustus killed Mark Antony, who very famously died with Cleopatra. But that 3-way power deal sounds super similar to the 3-way power deal proposed in the pilot and also in All the Bells, where all of the siblings were going to have equal power. So I find it super interesting that there is a triumvirate of sorts. And additionally, Rome was ruled by 2 consuls who were designed to keep each other in check. Rome and Kendall are co-COOs, like designed to balance each other out. And the treatment of Shiv is super misogynistic in a lot of instances, but it is also super in line with traditional views of how the Romans viewed women. Honestly, I know this is a little bit of a reach, but still, women could not vote or hold public office and were generally viewed as extensions of their husbands and fathers. Even the daughters of emperors were viewed in this light, and their primary function was to be a wife and mother. And this kind of mirrors Logan's comment to Tom about producing a grandson. But the best thing Shiv can do for him is actually to give him a grandson. He doesn't say grandchild, he says grandson. He doesn't really view Iverson, Kendall's son, as suitable, so he needs Shiv to give him another option. And after the another much discussed reference is like the staggering amount of Kendall Jesus connections. So I'm going to just preface that and say that there's going to be a lot of Kendall Jesus talk. But those are a lot of the more general, non-specific references. And so here's kind of moving into season 1. So I think another interesting one very early on is in I Went to Market, and it's when Logan is showing Willa all of the military medals he's collected. And this includes a Roman medal and a World War I medal. And it's precipitates the fight between Logan and Ewan over the fact that Logan did not personally fight in the war. And I think that this scene doesn't necessarily foreshadow anything, but it does establish Logan's fondness for the militaristic mindset and his unwillingness to get his own hands dirty than it is about Rome specifically, but I am saying that this is every reference, so here it is. And there are also 2 references in Which Side Are You On, episode 6, which is my favorite episode. Specifically during the vote of no confidence scene, Logan calls Kendall Judas in reference to the disciple that betrayed Jesus, and that's fairly on the nose, but it could be seen as foreshadowing to both Kendall betraying the family by going to Stewie, but also could be seen as foreshadowing to the season 2 finale. And the second reference is what I mentioned earlier, was that Logan calls Roman Romulus. And on a character level, this is clearly his father scolding his son by using his full name, but as previously established, Romulus killed his brother Remus to rule Rome, and Logan calls him this as he betrays his brother. And in episode 2, Austerlitz is kind of the first instance of some Jesus Kendall imagery, and he lays out in a crucifixion pose against the rocks in New Mexico, and this pose reoccurs throughout the series. So I think that it's important to note that this only emerges after Kendall fails to defeat his dad in the vote of no confidence. And I think it's here that he starts to kind of enter this mindset of both the victim of the situation and as the only person who can quote unquote save the whole company and by extension his family. And time period's off by like 1,000 years, but Kendall calls Greg a Machiavellian fuck in the season 1 finale, and Niccolo Machiavelli was Italian, aka Roman, and he lived during the Renaissance. There's a really interesting video differentiating Machiavellianism from psychopathy and narcissism, and I think that that might be fun to think about in a show full of narcissistic abusers, so I'll probably link that down below. And there are 2 references in the season 1 finale also, when Logan embraces Kendall after confronting him about the death of the waiter. He kisses him on the cheek. There are so many Judas references with Logan and Kendall that it wouldn't surprise me if this is deliberately included. Judas kissed Jesus's cheek before he sold him out to the Romans, and then Jesus got crucified. Logan kisses Kendall's cheek, also to kind of seal his fate that he's under his father's thumb. And this actually later gets paralleled in season 2. But another really interesting thing that I actually only picked up on my 6th rewatch of season 1 was that in season 1, in that scene, there's actually a huge tapestry in the background, and it's depicting a meeting of King Darius III and Alexander the Great, who were 2 kings who were meeting to try to broker peace, and then Alexander the Great absolutely dominated in battle and overtook the Persians. So what's really interesting about that is that it's 2 kings, 2 authority figures meeting, and then one of them slaughtering the other. And what I think is super interesting about that is that this, again, is not only a parallel to season 1, that Logan is betraying Kendall, but it's actually also that Kendall's gonna betray Logan in a season from now. I think that these things are very intentional, and they're very interesting to think about, all of the ways that they were able to kind of foreshadow through things like that, and they're very smart. So this is just me gushing. Now kind of moving into season 2, there are a lot fewer references, and one of the first ones that does pop up is that in the first episode, when everybody's meeting with Logan and they're deciding they're gonna sell, Tom remarks that it's like playing gin rummy with Zeus. Obviously Logan being Zeus, head of the family, Zeus, head of the gods, head of the Olympians. It's a fairly on the nose reference that I think most people will get. And another one pops up in Safe Room when Frank references Coriolanus, saying that he switched sides, and I had to look this up. He was a Roman general in the 5th century CE, and interestingly, this character inspired President Snow from the Hunger Games, and I don't think it holds much other significance than kind of characterizing Frank as being a little bit pretentious, but whatever. Another super interesting one that is really on the nose but also flew over my head is Rhea's name. So Rhea was one of the Titans and was the sister wife, of Kronos, and she is the mother of all the Olympians. And naming is something that I think is super intentional in this show, and I think this is a way of positioning her as someone who Logan wants to see as an equal, and he is frequently referred to as a Titan in the industry. So I think giving her the name of a Titan was a way to signal to the viewer that like Rhea is somebody who is of major importance. And she references being smuggled in like Cleopatra. And this references the very famous story of the way that Cleopatra and Caesar met. And when Caesar came to Egypt during a feud between Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy, she knew that she just couldn't go in and see him because there's no way that Ptolemy would want his extremely cunning and beautiful sister to ally with arguably the most powerful man in the world. So she had herself wrapped up in a carpet and was smuggled into Caesar's ruin, and he allegedly fell in love with her at first sight. And this is yet another instance of Rhea being aligned with being the lover of a powerful man. And she also quips that Kendall is Oedipus Roy, and this is taken from the play Oedipus Rex, which is probably one of the most famous tragedies ever written. And most people associate this with Freud's Oedipus complex, and it's kind of become shorthand for a person with mommy issues, but I hate Freud. And Oedipus actually claws his eyes out after he realizes he slept with his mother. And analysis-wise, this is yet another instance of Kendall being aligned with a very tragic figure, and it kind of echoes the point later on in season 3 that Kendall just never wins, ever. And then again in Turnhaven, Logan addresses the Pierce family by saying, like Romans amongst you Greeks, I'm sure you find us big, boisterous, and vulgar. I think this is fascinating because yes, the perception was that the Greeks were much more refined than the Romans, and I thought this was a way for Logan to defer in a way that still gives him the upper hand. Greek civilization is remembered for its impacts on culture and democracy, and the Pierces have an affinity for culture and their whole kind of thing about the Berlin Wall. So this comment kind of plays into their values, but Roman civilization is remembered for their military prowess, so Logan still holds all of the leverage. And this comment also works as a new money versus old money thing. It's important to remember that the Roys are new money and that they don't have the credibility and history that a family like the Pierces do. They see themselves as above the Roys because of this. And it's Logan playing into the stereotype to kind of sweeten them up. And it makes me think of this thing that my best friend told me, which is, there is nothing nicer than the man who hasn't hit it yet, which just sums up Logan in this whole thing with the Pierces. And now I'm gonna kind of move into the season 2 Jesus Kendall metaphors. And in the season 2 finale, he also shows up in the crucifixion pose again, and he kisses Logan on the cheek, like the reference to Judas right before going and betraying his dad. So again, more Jesus/Judas imagery for Kendall, which I think is super interesting. And then lastly, for season 3, there is all of the Nero and Sporus stuff, which I don't think I even need to touch on too much because it's so obvious. Nero and Sporus, come on. Like they kind of very clearly lay out. The one thing that I do think is interesting is that the foreshadowing is super obvious that, you know, Tom would betray Schiffer Greg, and to me it reads as incredibly homoerotic. But also there are some little known things about Nero that I think could possibly become relevant. Nero is actually the emperor's adopted son, so this could possibly indicate that possibly Tom could be the one to step up and have a larger role within the company. And also, you know, the thing that Nero's the most famous for is that he allegedly burned down Rome, and historians debate his involvement, and Nero himself blamed the Christians, but this could possibly indicate that Tom is going to wreak some level of havoc on the company. And I know that for some people, like, they may not buy that sort of foreshadowing, but A, they've proved that they've done that sort of foreshadowing before, and B, I think that Tom sort of sees himself as this Nero figure, so who knows? And then in the season 3 opener, Stewie sends Kendall a replica of the Trojan horse, and this honestly works on a lot of different levels. It first of all references when the Greeks entered the city of Troy in this giant wooden horse to attack the city and win the war, and it's used often as a turn of phrase to refer to a gift that actually turned out to be a threat. So first of all, it serves as Stewie congratulating Kendall for attacking his dad from the inside. Second, it is a threat to Kendall that he believes is a gift, and after he leaves his siblings, the real Trojan horse arrives. It's the donuts. It is a gift that is really a threat, and it kills that nascent deal that the siblings were forming. Like, even more so than that conversation with Jerry, like, the donuts serve as an interruption. And another fun little Nero-Sporus reference is that Tom references that Sporus gave Nero a ring, and this ring depicted the rape of Proserpina, aka Persephone. At the time, this was considered to be a really bad omen, which then, to me, plays into further speculation and theories that Greg is going to betray Tom. As much as I don't want that, I do think that that is something that could happen. And then lastly, there's a ton of Jesus imagery in Too Much Birthday, which is just such an amazing episode. First of all, there's the actual crucifix that Kendall is going to go up on, but anyone who was maybe not as familiar with the Christian canon, there's called the Way of the Cross, where like Jesus is going and he falls 3 times, like he's shoved down 3 times, and Kendall is shoved down by Roman, literally shoved down by a Roman on like his way to the cross. And I think that that is super intentional. And then lastly, I will put a figure out how to put a photo of it right here. But there at the end, when Kendall lays on Naomi's lap, it looks remarkably like the Pietà. And I think that that's super interesting, that it kind of mirrors that motherly figure, again, kind of painting Kendall as Jesus. There are some people who also talk about how every time we see Kendall, this is kind of a non-specific reference, about how he enters water a lot, and water in Kendall is something that's like a huge point, that every time he enters into the water, he kind of emerges as a new person, and playing with like the ideals of a baptism. And I do think that that's super interesting. There's most assuredly references and things that I didn't catch, and so if you found any, like, please let me know. I love Succession, and I could talk forever about all of the little things and theories, and it's just one of my favorite shows. So if you also like Succession, sound off, let me know. If you want me to talk about other shows, let me know. This is just me being annoying. So anyway, thank you very much, and I hope you all have a great day.